Chapter 3. Blaine. Blaine could not believe all the toys Tucker had purchased. In addition to the 5 men he'd gotten to help him last night, another 4 had agreed to help out tonight. Tucker had returned with his former teammate Emmett Brown, so including Blaine, there were 12 guys. Still, it took them almost an hour to get all the gifts loaded up. Almost an hour and 4 trucks. "Blaine, you want to ride with us?" Tucker asked as the men began choosing their rides. Blaine glanced around and nodded. Most of the other guys had already teamed up. Besides, he was curious about Emmett. He held the door open and let Emmett climb in first. Then he entered beside him and shut the door. A moment later, Tucker's door closed as well. "This is a nice gesture," Emmett said as Tucker turned the key. "Thanks, Rev. I guess you rubbed off on me more than you or I knew." Rev? Blaine wondered how the man had gotten that nickname. He would have to ask Tucker later. As they drove, he realized there was a lot about Tucker he didn't know. All he had seen before now was the confident running back with a chip on his shoulder. But here was a man going out of his way to bring gifts to kids he barely knew. Had it been the center that changed him so profoundly? Or something else? "So how's married life treating you?" Tucker asked. A wide smile broke out on Emmett's face. "It's the best, man. I can't believe I was so stupid and prideful at first, not to see how amazing Mia was from the beginning. I still kick myself that I let so many years go by, that I missed Carter's birth." He shook his head and sighed. "Anyway, I hope one day you find what I have, both of you. God said it was not good for man to be alone, and he was right. The 2 of them complete me in so many ways I never even thought possible." Blaine wondered what the story was with Emmett. Not only was he married, but he had a kid as well. He wanted to ask him if it was hard to balance a family with the requirements of pro football. Not that he was looking to start a family anytime soon, or ever with his past, but it was still good information to know. He kept his mouth shut, though. It didn't feel right to interrupt their reunion. As Tucker pulled into the parking lot of the center, Blaine's eyes widened. He wasn't sure he'd ever been to the center, but it had been a long time since he'd seen this many cars anywhere besides the stadium on game day. There were so many that Tucker was forced to pull the truck into the fire lane. "Are all these cars here for the party?" Blaine asked. Tucker nodded and turned off the ignition. "I think so." Emmett chuckled softly. "I hope we brought enough gifts." "Well, if we didn't, then I'll just have to go shopping again tomorrow." Before anyone could say another word, a woman in red came barreling their direction. Tucker opened the door and climbed out. "Who's that?" Emmett asked, leaning forward to see around Blaine. "I'm not positive, but my guess is that is the director, Shelby something or other." "Is there something going on between them?" "What?" Blaine looked again at the scene unfolding outside the window. Could it be? Was that the reason for Tucker's recent change? "I have no idea." "I rather hope it is. He deserves to find someone." Blaine glanced at Emmett, wondering what he knew about Tucker that Blaine didn't. Perhaps Blaine should have tried harder to get past Tucker's rough exterior. He would do better in the future. Being captain of the team meant responsibilities, and part of those responsibilities was knowing his teammates. "Shall we?" He nodded toward the window. Emmett nodded and Blaine opened the door. To his right, he heard the sound of the other men opening their doors and climbing down as well. Tucker exchanged a few words with the woman in red, and then she turned and strode into the center. A large smile adorned Tucker's face as he pivoted to face the players. "Let's go, boys," he said, and motioned with his hand for them to begin unloading the gifts. Blaine loaded one under each arm and followed Emmett into the center. Christmas had lost its excitement for him years ago, but a tiny twinge of something still tugged on his heart as he entered the center. White twinkle lights hung in low loops from the ceiling, along with red, green, and white streamers. Cheery wreaths of green and gold hung around the room like pictures frozen in time, and a small artificial tree completed the scene. The children had obviously decorated it as the ornaments were uneven, clumped in places and sparse in others, but somehow that only added to the magic. A table with food and drinks sat off to one side, almost like an afterthought. Certainly, no one was paying any attention to it at the moment. No, the attention was very clearly on the players as they entered with their brightly wrapped boxes. A silence hung in the air for just a moment, and then one child spoke up. "It's Tucker! I knew he'd make it!" That was all the encouragement the other kids needed. Like a giant wave, their energy washed over Blaine as little feet and eager faces scurried towards him. Memories of previous Christmases flooded him, and he forced them from his mind. He couldn't think about them now, or he would lose it. And tonight wasn't about him. It was about these kids. Their voices spoke over each other as if a prize existed for whoever could be the loudest. "One at a time," Tucker said with a smile, and he held up his hands to calm the children. "Let my friends set the gifts down first." Like magic, the children quieted, but their energy did not dissipate. Instead, it zinged around inside each one like a pinball. Blaine could see it in the bouncing of their feet or the shifting of their eyes as they looked from one player to the next. He hoped Tucker didn't speak long because he felt like the invisible dam holding the kids back might break any second. "First, let me introduce my friends." Inwardly, Blaine groaned. This was exactly what he'd been afraid of. While he didn't mind introductions, there were 12 of them. He didn't think the kids would last that long. A movement to the side caught his attention, and the world around him seemed to freeze as he caught sight of a beautiful woman in a dark green dress. Blaine was not normally one to fawn over a pretty face. He knew he was damaged, and he had no intention of dragging a woman into his mess. At least not long term, which was why football had become his wife, and women had been a nice way to spend a Friday evening. But there was something about this woman that held his interest. Something that drew his eyes to her, and he didn't think it was just her looks. She was gorgeous, no doubt, with her dark hair and creamy white skin, but he felt there was something else. Felt? What was he doing? He was not supposed to feel anything when it came to women. Not only did he have nothing to offer a woman, but he would never be able to give a woman a family, so feelings were not allowed. He was supposed to ignore these feelings, swallow them, and lock them away deep inside. It was fine to take a woman out once, for companionship, but feelings were not allowed. Ever. Not after the accident. Kenzi. Kenzi felt his eyes on her before she actually caught him staring. Tucker had managed to bring 11 teammates with him, and they stood in a line facing the children, wrapped boxes placed at their feet. Most were smiling, though she could tell a few felt completely out of their element. They were easy to spot by their rocking motion or restless eyes. Her gaze traveled up the line, but it stopped when she realized one pair of eyes was staring back at her. Deep and brown, they looked warm and inviting, but also as if they contained secrets. Blaine Hollis, of course. She'd found him attractive when the team roster had been first announced, but she'd been sure he had a girlfriend, like most of the other players did. However, as time went on, she realized the one thing about Blaine that stood out was that he never had a woman on his arm, or at least never the same woman. The television crews must have even caught on because they never panned to one in the crowd cheering him on, and there was never mention of one on news stories or in the tabloids. For some reason, he seemed intent on not dating seriously. Yet here he was, staring at her. Before she could react, his gaze slipped away and turned to Tucker, who was explaining the rules of picking a present. The children rocked back and forth as if an invisible field kept them in place until he gave them the word, and then pandemonium struck. Kids raced to grab a gift and then began tearing into them. Cheers and gales of laughter filled the room, and Kenzi turned when a hand touched her arm. Shelby smiled at her and then nodded toward the kids. "We did good, didn't we?" "Yeah, you did." There was no way she was taking credit for this party. All of this work had been Shelby's doing. "What are you talking about? This place is gorgeous, and it wouldn't have looked so amazing if you hadn't decorated it. I know you left college because you weren't sure what you wanted to do, but I think you might have found your niche." Kenzi let the words sink in and gazed around the room. Maybe Shelby was right. She had enjoyed decorating the space, and it did look amazing. Could it be that she'd finally found her calling? But if I go back to school, how will you keep the center running? Shelby grinned and shook her head. I don't think that's going to be a problem. I have a feeling this event will bring kids into the center, and once enrollment is up, I can hire more help if I need to. I'll think about it, Kenzi said, but her mind was already walking through the possibility. She'd enjoyed college when she'd attended, until she'd realized she was taking classes she might never need. After changing her major twice and watching her graduation date move from 4 to 5 and then to 6 years, she'd decided she should save her parents some money and figure out what she wanted to do before taking any more classes. Kenzi had no idea what kind of degree an interior designer might require, nor how many hours it would be, but it might be worth looking into. When the commotion of opening presents began to die down, Kenzi moved to the refreshment table to help serve food and drinks. Her stomach rumbled as her eyes took in the delectable desserts, but she was not going to partake, not only because the food was for the kids, but because she didn't need the sugar. People never understood when she told them that. "But you're so thin," they always said. "Surely a little sugar wouldn't hurt a little thing like you." But they didn't know about her past. They didn't know about the merciless teasing she'd endured in middle school and junior high, or the rigorous diet she followed now to keep the weight off. Not even Shelby knew about that. "Looks good." Kenzi glanced up to see Blaine Hollis standing across from her. "Excuse me?" Surely he had been referring to the food, and not her. A light pink color tinged his cheeks, and he shook his head. "The food, it looks good. Not that you don't, but—" She should stop him, tell him she understood what he'd meant, but she was rather enjoying watching him try to recover. He always looked so cool and collected on the field. It was nice to know there was another side to him. He took a deep breath. "Let me start over. The food looks amazing. What would you recommend?" Recommend? She could recommend nothing because she had tried nothing. But she didn't want to explain that to him, because when she admitted the truth, questions always followed. "Well, if you like chocolate, the brownies are always a good bet. Or if you prefer fruit, the apple pie has been a big hit." "Which would you choose?" His gaze held hers, and a tingle ran down her neck at his boldness. She licked her lips as she looked from the brownies to the apple pie. "Well, chocolate has always been my poison, so I guess I'd do the brownies." A part of her wanted to see him take a brownie, to know they had at least that in common. It wasn't much to build a relationship on, but it was a start, right? Relationship? What? She was getting way ahead of herself. The man was here for dessert, not to ask her out. But if they ever did go out, it would be nice to know they had a love of chocolate in common. Except, if he loved chocolate and ever offered her any, she knew she would take it because there was no way she was explaining to him why she avoided it now. And then where would she be? Maybe she wanted him to take the fruit after all. "I guess it is a little like poison," he said with a chuckle. "But then that's why I work out so much. What's your name?" "Kenzi Lanham." Her words felt tight in her chest. She couldn't believe she was talking to Blaine Hollis. She didn't have a poster of him on her wall or anything. She was too old for that. But she did have a jersey with his name on it. Folded up and in her bottom drawer, but there. He was her celebrity crush. One of them, anyway. And here she was having a conversation with him. He nodded and reached for a brownie. His eyes stayed locked on hers as he took a bite. Kenzi held her breath, hoping she had made the right recommendation. The corners of his mouth pulled into a smile. "This is delicious, Kenzi. You have good tastes. Speaking of, do you know who did the decorating around here?" Kenzi's heart fluttered in her chest. He liked the decorating? Did that mean she really did have talent? "Actually, I did. It's not much, but it was rather last minute." His eyes widened. "You did this? Are you a designer?" Kenzi chuckled, even as her teenage self screamed and swooned inside her. "No, not yet anyway, but—" She looked again at the room. "I think I might be going back to school to get my degree." "I think you should definitely consider it." He flashed her another smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Well, Kenzi Lanham, it was nice meeting you. Perhaps I'll see you around?" "Definitely." Kenzi held on to the lip of the tabletop to keep herself from folding to the ground as he flashed her a smile and then disappeared back into the crowd.